This is not financial advice. I'm not an expert. I'm not someone sitting on £1 million card collection pretending I've cracked the code. I'm just somebody who likes trading cards, likes collecting, likes markets, and realized at some point that I actually don't fully understand how this world works. I watch videos from people who clearly know what they're doing, or they sound like they know what they're doing. I hear terms like liquidity and supply shocks, market cycles, price discovery, portfolio construction, velocity, relative strengths. And I realized a lot of the time, I sort of understood what they meant. I recognized the words as English words, but not really. Like, I have a card ladder subscription, but I don't know what all the squiggly lines do or mean. And here's the thing, I suspect I'm not alone because the sports card world is strange. You can have one card sell for £50 one day and £200 the next. You can have cards that are numbered to 299 outsell cards that are numbered to 25. You can have one player's market explode because of a good tournament and collapse 6 months later, or explode for no real seeming reason, or collapse because of the same. And then you've got grading on top of that. PSA 10, PSA 9, population reports, gem rates, raw versus graded. There's a lot going on. And what I've realized is that most collectors, including me, are often making decisions emotionally first and logically second. We buy because we like the player, or we buy because a card looks cool, or very often we buy because everybody on social media is talking about somebody. I've gotten to a habit recently whenever a Instagram account that I follow mentions a player worth buying, I immediately look them up on eBay. Sometimes we buy because we're scared the price is about to go up. And sometimes that works, but more often than not, it really doesn't. So this is a group of videos of me basically trying to learn how markets actually function, not from a perspective of becoming rich, not from a perspective of being some finance guru, but from a perspective of being less stupid. And that's really the goal. I want to understand what makes cards valuable. Why do some cards stay expensive but others collapse? How do experienced people read the data? What makes a card liquid? What makes something risky? How does grading affect markets? And how do you tell the difference between hype and genuine demand? And honestly, I think there's a gap here. I've seen there's a lot of channels aimed at advanced collectors, and there's a lot of channels focused purely on opening PSA returns and showing mail days. But there aren't that many I see that start from a position of, right, let's properly learn how this thing works. So this is what I'm going to do. And I think the first thing to understand is that cards are not really about cardboard. They're about stories, and that sounds dramatic, but I think it's true. A trading card's value is usually tied to the popularity of the player, the rarity of the card, the condition of the card, the timing of the market, and the emotional excitement around all those things. And that's why somebody like Lionel Messi can sustain value across years, because he's not just a footballer anymore, right? Lionel Messi is history, he's legacy, he's global, he's culture. Whereas a young prospect might spike massively after a great tournament or after a rumor that they're going to move to a big club because people are buying the dream of what that player could become. So think somebody like Lamine Yamal, right? Lamine Yamal is a great footballer, but he's being compared to Lionel Messi before Lamine Yamal has played in a World Cup. He's played in 1 Euros. Lionel Messi has won 8 Ballon d'Ors, 4 Champions Leagues, 2 Copa Americas, and the 2022 World Cup. He's put up over 800 senior goals across nearly 2 decades at the top of the sport. Now, Yamal is still at the beginning of his career. Now, the excitement comes from the possibility that he might one day enter that conversation, and the card that you're holding today will be worth 20, 30, 40 times what it is today. And that's important because it means card prices are not always rational. If they were rational, you would look at performance and you would tie price to performance. Sometimes they're driven by data, sometimes they're driven by emotion, usually they're driven by both. And I think that's where this gets really interesting because if you only understand cards emotionally, you can make terrible decisions because you chase hype and you overpay and you panic and you convince yourself that a card is cheap because it used to cost more, or you convince yourself that a card is cheap because you believe that it's going to go up in value and you've got to get it today. But if you only understand the financial side, you miss the human side of collectibles entirely, and cards are human. A good friend of mine said this to me today. He said, remember, you're buying from humans, and humans buy nostalgia. They buy identity. They buy hope. They buy status. They buy players that they watch with their kids. They buy players they grew up with. And that emotional layer does matter because that's who you're selling to. So what I'm going to try to learn here is how to balance those two things. How do you enjoy the hobby while still making intelligent decisions? How do you avoid completely getting wrecked by hype cycles? How do you understand what the data is actually telling you? Because one thing I think I've realized already is most people, including me, are terrible in interpreting data properly. We look at one sale and assume that's the market, or we see a big number and anchor to it emotionally. We ignore supply, we ignore liquidity, we ignore how difficult something might be to sell. We ignore anything that tells us what we don't want to hear. So I want to learn how not to do that. So over the next few videos, I'm going to start trying to break this down piece by piece, not as an expert teaching beginners, but as somebody trying to build a proper framework for understanding this market. Like, I want to learn how to read card ladder properly. I want to understand population reports. I want to understand market cycles. I want to understand grading risk. I want to understand portfolio construction. I want to understand why some collectors seem consistently disciplined while others probably buy high and sell low and don't tell you about it on their Instagram stories. And maybe by the end of this process, we'll all get a bit better at this together. Because right now, I think a lot of us are just guessing or watching videos and not actually understanding the lessons that are being taught to us. And honestly, it's currently probably a dangerous way to approach a market where some people are spending thousands of pounds on pieces of cardboard. So if that sounds interesting to you, give me a subscribe. And then the next episode, we'll start with one of the biggest questions in the hobby, which is what actually makes a trading card valuable? Because I suspect the answer is much more complicated than most people think.